I'd like to talk about the general, and then I would like you to explain a little bit of the particular.
Yeah. Okay.
There are a set of principles, I believe, that have even been published back in 1999 for play of this kind.
Yeah.
And in my circles at the time, it was represented by a French writer, Ferry Bezelman, who did a game called Soap. And
Okay.
Soap was very influential at the Forge. And
Okay.
it is the direct parent of Universalis, which was
Yeah.
published a few
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah. I
So,
know.
yes.
I know Universalist.
Mhm.
So
So
that's
then, yeah, the pronunciation is very funny because
yeah.
some people pronounce it Universe Alice like it was a girl, you know.
Yeah.
So, anyway, you are not the only person who has contacted me for consultation about a game of this general design.
Okay. So you
And
have expertise in this
well,
area. So
I do, but that also can be a dangerous thing for you and also for that other person because I am not interested in the general commonalities of this school of design.
okay.
And I have noticed that the authors of the games are perhaps unaware of how non of how common this is. And
Yeah.
so therefore or also of features that have been adopted into other games as well, if not the entire model. So therefore they need to focus on the particulars of their game and why it brings and why and how it brings something uniquely valuable to this basic model.
Okay.
Tell me if I have this wrong because I don't want to go the wrong direction with this. But if
Uh.
we get
Yeah.
several, what I'm about to say this. So we have several people, and what I'm going to say is almost the same as what you have in your text, and I'll bet it is about the same as your pitch when you sit down with people. This group of people is going to share a story. They are going to be able to speak in a very free way. They have a lot of what I call backstory and situational authority, which means that this person might introduce some content concerning the background of the situation. And then a little bit later, this other person might introduce something about the background of a situation. Also, the same goes for setting up the situation of play at the moment. Different people can take charge of that. This one says, well, now we are, so therefore, it's now midnight in the middle of the woods, and my character or a character is doing this thing. And so then later, another person might say something like where we are looking at the time. So it's a decentralization of that kind of authority.
Yeah.
There's also a general sense of, or a decreased ownership. A person may feel very strongly as advocating for a certain character at some time, but that feeling fades in and out. They don't have to be invested in this character as intrinsic to their participation. So
y-
the
That's
so
true.
mhm. So all of
Yeah.
these things are said, and then you also say things like how gentle we are going to be with each other. The model is this reassuring picture that everybody is going to be uh, consensual or at least sensitive to the quality and the product of the fiction that we are doing in terms of everybody effectively being an executive director.
Yeah.
So with that there, then the conduct of this model is usually to first, at a general level, establish some idiom. People say genre expectations, but I tend to think in a different term, which is idiom, which is just the components of what we are working with. There's somebody, sooner or later, we will end up in a flat, round starship with multiple living spaces, and the people are cat people,
Yeah.
sooner or whatever.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so
It
then,
depends.
right, and then you move into the particulars of important personages, important meaning that their activities and interests are having a big impact in a situation, and then drilling down further and further, sooner or later, other characters and these characters start doing things, and the fiction has effectively begun to move.
Yeah.
So the other feature is that the other big horror in the model is of randomized and particular mechanics. The idea that you take a mechanic that resolves something one way or the other, it's not impossible or disliked, but it is kept at a very minimal and very large scale, so that you don't have a situation where rolling to do this one thing then necessitates a roll to do this other thing.
Yeah.
There is a tendency for the dice to be considered, or anything like them, to be considered something of a desperation device. They're there, but really we should be able to just agree our way through. But for some reason, people seem to like these things, so we'll put them in. We can use them as pivot moments if we want. In this model, randomized methods tend to be highly isolated to specific points of play,
Yeah.
and yeah,
This is also the fact
right,
that it is a the conflict situation occurs and then you bring the dice in.
yes,
But the difference between Tales of Entropy and what you said, that you could just like agree to things
hmm,
and move on without using the mechanics. Uh, in Tales of Entropy, the main characters that are being guided are
hmm,
one way or another enemies
yes,
with each other.
yeah,
And the game is supposed to work so that you push them against each other. So you actually try not to avoid
right,
conflicts, but you try to seek conflict between the
precisely.
characters. And that is the thing that creates the drama in the
Yes,
game.
I understand that, and I think I would like to return to it in
Yeah,
terms of the operation of the mechanics.
yeah,
But before I do that, I had forgot to mention that the idea of defining fairly elaborate or fairly well understood conflicts of interest among the characters before play is also often a feature of the model. It's
okay,
found less so in Universalis, but it is very much found that way in soap because it is
okay,
based on soap operas. So
yeah,
everybody,
yeah,
right? But it's also to be found in many people have learned these techniques from uh, Vincent Baker's In a Wicked Age,
yeah,
which is a different kind of game in many ways, but it shares this feature that you set up this conflicting set of interests, and it's usually written on a paper. You have a diagram in your game. All of these games have a similar diagram where there are little points or pictures of names or something written down, and then there are arrows pointing every which way.
yeah,
The game that I was just reviewing, because I'm talking to its author right now, was published in 2005 called Ganakagok.
okay,
Ganakagok is won an award that year, and everybody was so excited about Ganakagok. And then every game after that for 2 years was basically just a skin of Ganakagok. And it had an exceptionally complicated beginning map. You would spend a long time with a group of people, and every single character just had complicated arrows pointing everywhere.
okay,
And so the the thing so I'm just saying this is a big part of this is sort of a big subroutine of the model that is often observed, and I recognize it quite well. My concerns, or maybe I should put it this way, I recognize that you have played this at the table with people and that it has worked. You are not talking about something that you sit down to play and everybody is upset and bored.
no,
I'm
we
completely
played.
aware of this. Yes.
Yeah, we played 2 years, and Eero has played with his group many
Mhm.
times also. So
Yes.
it has been quite extensively played.
Yes. Now, there are some issues, however, with that. One issue is uh, once committed to this more general model that I'm talking about, and it tends to be very romantically appealing to many people. For example, you will notice that almost all of them begin by what we say in English, backhanding, insulting or tacitly being a little passive aggressive about other role playing games. This
Ah,
one doesn't, force you to play one character. This one doesn't force you to use the dice when you don't want to, or something like that.
okay.
And so there's a tendency to say in this game, we are all cooperative. We are all going to share in the imagination. Kind of overlooking the fact that you do this even in games that are very full of dice and very competitive. They are still sharing everything and they are still cooperating on the imagination. So
Yeah.
the thing I am trying to say is that there is a sense of belonging, almost a sense of familiarity to be playing any one of these games. And so I am going to ask the big question, which is why is this one, what is its unique value? And that's question cannot really be answered. You may have an answer for me right away, but I don't want that answer.
Yeah, I
I
I don't think it's a
yeah,
simple answer I can
right.
give you, but
Yeah. So therefore, for me to really understand that and also to critique it, we need to walk through some things a little more, at a little slower, I guess.
yeah,
The first thing then is to look at these at your setup. And I read through the example that you gave,
yeah,
and I thought about it, and I thought about the mechanisms that you describe. And one of the things that I have noted, let's see, if I were to provide a quick sketch. And I think a great example is of the shaman style character that you presented a picture of
yeah,
with the skull.
yeah,
Yes. So, what if, just imagine, and this is not a suggestion for your game, I'm presenting this as a procedure that I hope will be thought provoking for you. The procedure that I'm going to describe is to sit down with a group of people and say, okay, I have a pretty easy to play role playing game here, and it is adaptable. We don't we need to come up with a great deal about it as a setting and things like that, kind of as we go, but it's going to be very easy. And they say,
mm,
how? And I say, no problem. Here. And I put down that picture.
yeah,
And I say, now, this may not be a character in the story, but this is the kind of feel and the kind of characters and the kind of act, if you whatever you imagine this character doing, those are the kinds of activities that go on in our setting.
yeah,
And so now everybody uh, writes uh, write a quick description of any such character and give me, and that includes 3 or 4 things that could reasonably be used as traits in play. Go.
yeah,
And you don't have any other setting discussion. Not one.
yeah,
Not even a little. And no situation, no backstory, nothing. And everybody comes up with a little thing, and we look at them all. And if nobody has gone berserk and made up stuff that's not in the picture implicitly, which they tend not to do. They tend to stay pretty, they get inspired by the picture. And soon we learn that there's a sacrificial stone. It's not in the picture, but of course, why not? Look at it. We could well have a sacrificial stone.
yeah,
And so everybody's fine with that. Nobody gets a little bit, has a bizarre time. At that point, it's very easy to make up names. And usually, people that's more communal. People will start listening to how another person made up a name, and then I am looking at or anybody, but let's say me, I look across these things, I do a little thought, and some issues for a potential backstory occur, and then we begin to play, and then we let part of the system is to keep filling in a little bit more about what is going on. Then conflicts of interest will emerge through play, and so we never had to draw the map. And
Yeah.
so or one could even just say, look for a chance for conflicts of interest, otherwise this will be boring. And so
Yeah.
as we play, sooner or later, with the ability, perhaps a managed ability, to contribute to the past, so it doesn't balloon and skyrocket, then it's pretty. What I'm saying is that the techniques for getting what you are talking about can be more open or different from what you are describing.
Yeah.
And the downside to the way you have it, particularly setting up the characters that way, and particularly being so meticulous with the initial material, is that we will play the last 5% of a story. Nearly all of what we would think of as rising action and consequential decisions, it's all accounted for. We will see the final shootout, and we will see whether the undercover policeman shoots his partner, or shoots the thief that he has been pretending to be a friend with and has actually helped all this time. So we will find out whether he does this or does that. But pretty much anything that contributes to that, we're not playing. It's pretty much already there. So you
The,
have a tendency for a very beautiful final operatic conclusion that everybody can play, and there will be no missteps because we have agreed upon everything and learned everything, and we have, so we are getting perilously close to simply doing the final act of a 10 episode series. We are getting perilously close to doing that and knowing our parts already so well that we just perform them, even with a couple of decisions. Do you see what
yeah.
I'm getting at?
Yeah. But I feel that we, in actual play, we kind of haven't ended up doing like that,
Okay,
because
tell me more.
if you think that it's just happens to be that there is one conflict and then it all ends, it's like the normal game takes about 2 sessions,
Mm-hmm.
and we may have more than, usually it's more than 10 scenes at least,
Right.
the one
So,
game. So
mm-hmm.
it has many the story has many uh, it goes that way, and then it goes this way, so you don't know beforehand almost anything about it. And uh, the situation presented in it's kind of it's partially a literary exercise
Mm-hmm.
to write a beginning situation, yeah, and one character. And the scenario database is like the format of scenario in this game is so that you have a beginning situation, and then you have one character that is given, and the one character has somehow he has some deep issue with the beginning situation or
Yes.
agenda or something like that. And
Yes.
the other characters uh, tap into that somehow. It begins so that the first character created after the initial setup is an enemy of the given character, and
Yes.
the second character is an enemy or of either of them or both of them. So
No, I
it
understand that. Yes,
yeah,
you do have a number of working tensions there.
yeah,
Um, I am very interested in those twists and turns of events through the scenes
yeah,
by which the characters can be said to change. You have the dropping out mechanic.
yeah.
And so then there are others. I don't know if you're familiar with my game Spiona, which also falls into this category in some ways.
uh, I haven't checked. I have heard the name,
Yes.
yes, but
Um,
I haven't but the characters change after each conflict.
right.
The winner of the conflict, uh, he is given a burden, and the
Yes.
burden is defined by the loser of the conflict,
Right.
and usually the burden somehow it doesn't prevent him from winning that conflict, but
Right.
it somehow gives some like it's something that can be caused because of his victory, or some element that is must be brought in later on the game.
Hmm.
And also, if you can't figure out the new burdens, you can increase the ones he has already. But this tends to change the characters a lot in during the game, because the enemy, if a character is enemy to one to other character, that is only the beginning situation. And while the game works that you should always play the characters as strongly as possible,
Hmm.
sometimes the characters change during.
Right.
For example, we've had multiple uh, times when a character has fallen in love with another character whose enemy he was before,
Right.
and that creates a tension where he's still kind of, I'm your enemy, but I'm somehow in love with you
Right.
also.
Right.
And that brings like new elements that you can bring in further scenes that continue when the game continues.
Can I do a quick summary? And remember, I'm not an expert on the game, so I'm probably
Yeah,
missing something.
yeah,
But what we have is uh, uh, at the end of a conflict, for example, uh, the winner of the conflict gets a burden.
yeah,
The There's also the scene consequences where characters get flame or shadow or
yeah,
both.
yeah,
And then we also have an issue of who is going to be the focus of the next scene. That is
yeah.
also a consequence of play.
Yeah,
So,
but that's the easy rule when you start a new scene.
mhm.
There must be a focus character. There has to be the character that has had the least amount of scenes
Sure,
played.
but there is a mechanism, is
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yes,
That's true.
and so I am quite fond of mechanisms of all these kinds, but we are not really talking about my play preference. The reason I say fond right now, I'm speaking more in terms of how the whole thing is not really just people sitting around agreeing,
Yeah,
or even worse. And I will cite one more game before I quit telling you title after title. Very famous game, Primetime Adventures.
yeah. I know the game. Yeah,
Yes, and in my experience, the very first version, which was published in a very limited run and very low tech, it was not a fancy book,
yeah,
um, and it used dice, not cards, was the
yeah,
best version.
yeah,
It ends every single time he wrote it again, and every time he answered questions about it as it went along, he kept making it more and more and more like a bunch of people sitting around proposing things to each other.
ah, yeah,
And it became, in my opinion, the final version that I think I paid for in a Kickstarter or something was, I mean, I find it almost unreadable, and I have no desire to play it whatsoever.
okay,
Um, the the reason I bring this up is because you probably are aware of how unfortunate it is in play if people start debating about how it can go next.
yeah,
And instead of simply moving into an imagined
yeah,
situation, and
yeah,
then whoever it is has that particular input, status at the moment,
yeah,
and they just do it. And there is
yeah,
no consensual negotiation about this. And this is I think, a very powerful feature of this kind of play, rather than
yeah,
it goes against the ideology, though. Remember, the ideology is all about how much we love each other and how much we love
yeah,
the story and
yeah,
how much we love, love, love. And that it's kind of, after a little bit, you have to say, and if you don't do something that I find as a player a little bit edgy, a little bit, oh, do we
Yeah.
really want it to go this
Yeah.
way? If you don't do that, it's going to be kind of boring.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it,
Indeed.
yeah.
And that's the game. I feel that's the game part of things. You are the creative part is you bring stuff that you feel that belong to this scenario. You
Mhm.
figure out something that, yeah, if we take an example of that shaman setting, yeah, there could be Vikings or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Right.
that is bringing elements, but the game is, in my opinion, the game is the thing that nobody can control beforehand. It's something
Right.
that brings out bizarre things, that almost bizarre things, but things that you could never see beforehand. When you play a game of entropy, there haven't been ever a situation where you could imagine what happens before, because the scenario itself also is like a skeleton. It's very short
Hmm.
because it is supposed to be read out loud before the play starts. And the idea is, in the prep phase, is that players bring in stuff that they feel that uh, they are they are interested in something. They want to bring stuff that like belongs to this starting situation. And but then when the characters clash, it's like it's entropy. That's the name, kind of uh, comes from that.
Or instead of being intrusive and frightening and disruptive to the story or the fiction, which is
Yeah,
kind of the myth in well, I will even say in Finland, there's a fairly well developed subculture of gaming that says
yeah,
any such thing is intrusive. We hate
yeah,
them. We hate them. We hate
yeah.
them.
I know.
Right.
I
And
I
so,
know
yes.
that.
And
That's why
so,
I said that this
right.
kind of game is like it's almost a niche culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a subculture of
Right.
gaming that some people seem to like hate, and other people's like me love.
Maybe getting rid of all of the reassuring qualities of the model I was talking about, just leaving them out. Never mind that we are all going to sit around and share an imagination together and, oh, don't worry, it's not about competition.
Yeah,
Never mind all that shit.
yeah,
And just if the game delivers on those promises, then it will do it. You don't
yeah,
have to. And also, and therefore they say, well, what is this one like? And you can say, this is the one when there is no safety net for the plot.
yeah,
And that's different, isn't it, from a lot of
yeah,
these games?
yeah. That
All
is
of a
different.
sudden you say, wow, there's no safety net for the plot, and yet it's still going to have this kind of gentle and multiple authority kind of way of doing things. You
Yeah,
know what? That sounds like a lot of fun.
yeah.
That sounds like it's not so bad.
And
Um,
that sounds something that I have never
yeah,
said. Maybe
right.
I have
Total,
should.
total. There's perhaps a lot in those starting conflicts. And the question is, how much would be just as easy and just perhaps even more elegant to permit to develop through the first scene or two of play? Sometimes it is more fun to say, okay, and every one of these characters, this would be kind of interesting. What if everybody set up these characters and each one had a small reason or a very basic reason to like or be on the side of all the other characters?
Yeah,
All of them. And so every single character on that sheet, you say, oh, well, these two have been friends since they were children. Oh, these two, they shared a feast last year. Oh, well, these two are going to get married and there's no real problem with that.
yeah,
Now imagine that sheet looking at you. I find it terrifying. Do you see why? Because whatever happens in that first scene is going to be, I mean, you can have it, you can tell everybody, okay, or have procedures, whichever, but something is going to make all of this turn to shit. Or if not
yeah,
all, then some of it. And we don't know which parts. right?
Yeah.
Maybe the childhood friends will become even more powerfully friends. Maybe the couple who is going to get married, one murders the other.
Yeah.
But the point is that you find out through events and interactions, and that itself becomes play. And I
Yeah.
think, and so I'm just presenting that as a thought at the moment. Let's look at that when we play and
Yeah.
say just how much of that is locking too much down.
Yeah.
We can let
We
flame and shadow and stuff like that play a causal role in developing that kind of action.
yeah. We've discussed about we have some developed some things over the course of playtest that could initiate something like a uh, extended rule set or something. And one of these issues was that what about if the characters were friends against each other, friends and not enemies, and
Yes.
form the beginning map through that. But uh, the idea behind one thing first. Being enemy of another character doesn't mean that the characters know each other.
I
Or
completely understand
yeah,
that. I completely
they
understand
they
it.
they only need to be enemies in um, in the drama that
Yes.
they have
I right.
somehow conflicting world views or something
I
like that.
completely understand that as a
Yeah,
concept. That
yeah.
is yeah.
And
The-
that was the beginning. That was like the uh, where I based this game because it's so like a powerful tool
mhm.
to bring
The question is,
interesting
Res,
things. Like
I
yeah,
agree, but the question now becomes, let's think of it then as a hammer.
yeah,
Now, how hard and fully and consequentially does that hammer strike first? In other words, is it better? I mean, just how hard does it need to be? That's a dial, you know. If you have everybody be friends and then nothing happens, then there is no hammer strike at all. If you
yeah,
have everybody be friends or whatever, you know, not enemies, and then the way play works is that there is a very precise disruption of some kinds through the mechanics of the game or through the procedures of the game, then you have like a what we call in English a ball peen hammer, right, with a little very
yeah,
fully round head that
yeah,
strikes very precisely on an incredibly small area.
yeah,
But it sets up vibrations, and of course, as you know, a ball peen hammer is a very effective, precise tool.
yeah,
Or you have a maul, which is a big, huge, round, flat striking surface, and you can only use it through its own gravity. It's not really your muscles, only a little bit.
yeah,
They direct it, and its own gravity will bring it down at a remarkable amount of force that will, you know, cover a wide area.
yeah,
So right now I am looking at a mole,
yeah,
and I am only asking, let's consider that the degree, the nature of that tool can be adjusted or reconsidered or perhaps thought of as a feature no matter what. So
yeah,
that's something. Just again, these are impressions. This is not really a consultation yet, you know.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is these are just impressions. I'm letting you know what I see, what I think, what I feel when I
yeah,
look through some of these things. Another issue which I think you are in pretty good shape with is that uh, you're in pretty good shape with this, that it's a bad idea to completely lock down the results of any conflict before you conduct it.
yeah. That's
That's a so I'm looking at your rules for that, and I don't know them perfectly well, but you seem to have some nice steps and things in there that
yeah.
that seem to work with that.
There was, but there is many phases to a conflict because there is. We talked about giving the burden, but then is also the players who are not having a characters in the conflict. They can
Yes,
insert things
yes,
into the world, the game world itself. The
Yeah,
game
I
world has,
completely understand that as well.
yes,
Yeah.
and that is one idea I love because I took it almost straight from Shock. You know the
Yes.
game
Yes, I
Shock,
do.
and
Yes, yes. I
and the thing
definitely
that
see this. Yeah.
yeah, I love the thing that every player
Hmm.
is always invested in the table, even though
Yeah.
they might have lost a character
Hmm.
already, but they still can contribute quite heavily in the game.
Yes, all of
Uh,
that matters quite a bit, and
yeah,
I completely understand. And so I am thinking here there are several recommendations that I would like to make or consider, but I don't want to make them as recommendations because at this point I consider
yeah,
myself not qualified. You know,
okay,
I mean, I'm not qualified to really speak as a consultant yet.
yeah,
So, but there are a lot of things that are very strong here, and so a great deal of what you and I may talk about is how do you bring them out to the person who is first introduced to the game,
yeah,
either in
that's
reading or in encountering it, or better yet, in teaching, in the
yeah.
pedagogy of the game.
And you said about being universal and the game being universal, and I think that uh, that's a
Oh, shoot.
risk nowadays
Yes, yes, I
because
agree. I agree.
that's something that uh, creates further difficulty at this point.
Right,
Because
right.
my idea is that uh, the setting and the feeling and the stuff that you normally get when you create like a role-playing setting or something like that is poured into the scenario itself.
Yes,
That so you kind of uh, you notice when you read if you read the different scenarios, the database has like 30 of them, and
yes,
we have all written some of the Aero and
yes,
me
yes.
and another Aero and stuff, but they have quite different approaches on things, and there are some that are really
Right,
like have weird mood or something like
right.
that, and I feel that this is a game where you can like the core what you use in the table, the you roll the dice and you do the things, they are like it's like a machinery,
Yes,
but the color of the fabrics and the color of the scenery and color of things you have you bring when you write a scenario, and when you play the game you bring more of that, but
of course. But I
yeah,
think, if I'm not mistaken, you are beginning to think about just how much of that should be in the introduction and how much of it needs to develop from the introduction.
yeah,
So we will talk more about that. I think that is actually a crucial issue, in fact.
yeah. Is there something I can click again?
Only,
Ah, here, maybe.
aha,
Yeah.
hooray,
Ah, sweet.
we are here. Okay,
Technology is now our slave and
yes.
not the vice versa, as usual.
Now, the good news is that I feel I have finally done my job and really reviewed your system.
Okay, sweet.
And yes, and I think that there's, before I tell you about how much I like it, which I can,
Okay, that's
so let's just, you can take that as a given. When you want me to say, wait, I am depressed now, tell me how good it is, then just let me know. Okay. If you have a really good system for keeping the fiction running
yeah,
and developing it and for consequences, then you don't need all that other shit.
yeah,
And he over engineers everything else.
yeah. But he's very analytical. I would
Hmm.
say that he analyzes everything,
Hmm.
even to maybe too extreme.
So, in my taste, or in my, not just a taste, I think this is an actual good principle of design. If everything is procedurally accounted for,
Yeah,
then nothing is there to do.
yeah,
And I think that you convinced me in our last talk, and then I reviewed the system carefully, and I agree that you are not falling into the trap of too much consensus, too much agreement. Well, we'll just talk through it and everything. What's the
Yeah.
next scene going to be? Okay, does everybody agree? What's the next
Yeah.
conflict going to be? Does everybody agree? What's
Yeah.
the outcome? Does everybody
Yeah.
agree? You don't have
Yeah.
that problem. So that's
Yeah.
great. Um, let's stay with that for a moment. You have avoided that problem. Now for the problem or the potential problem that I am a little worried about, which is that you don't need very much to jump into play. But procedurally, you have a lot. You have a
Yeah.
big committee discussion, a
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
big session.
Yeah. Almost the first, like I would say that 1/3 of the actual game is more or less brainstorming and doing some stuff to like put all players into the same page that we are when we are going to actually unfold the story, what happens in the game
Mm-hmm.
itself. It's almost as in the idea behind that was from Shock. Do you know Shock?
Very well,
Social
yes.
science fiction game.
Very well.
A great concept in that game. I
Actually,
think. Yeah, I think it's one of the uh, main influencers in behind my game. But I tried to be a little bit smaller. Do the beginning uh, setup a little bit smaller by uh, giving a written like startup in the form of written scenario that gives a little bit more than what you have if you start to brainstorm from completely empty table.
this is interesting because, at least as a potential contrasting view, I
Okay.
think that you may actually have more than shock
More than in
rather
Shock.
than
Okay.
less.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about procedurally, the kind of brain activity and the negotiation and talking.
Yeah.
One of the things I really like about shock is that you have potential shocks to the system, right?
Yeah.
And then you also have characters,
Yeah.
and then you are only really playing a very small subset of those things. You see where this character and that shock come together, and you say, okay,
Yeah.
forget everything else. Everything
Yeah.
else is details. We're doing
Yeah.
that. And you
Yeah.
really don't discuss anything else. The rest is left up to what they call ephemera during play. And you kind
Yeah.
of make the world seems very rich very fast, but you really didn't have to discuss it.
Well, it may be that the groups I've played it with are like too much into world building
Right.
when
So they
when it and it has no as you said, it has no procedures, and that uh, uh, not so much procedures in the beginning, and that causes one problem. You don't have a procedure that it ends. You can have like hours and hours of it before it
Right. You see, that's
kind
what
of
I'm trying to
reaches.
avoid.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
in other words, you have been playing with people who filled in what they saw as a gap and jumped in
yeah,
and started to
yeah,
go.
yeah,
Okay, so yes, and now that I think about it, whenever I play Shock, one of my most important roles when I'm organizing play is to say, okay, shut
yeah,
up.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
That's enough.
This is
Okay.
enough. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
done. Go.
I understand
Where is the
because
character? What are they
okay,
doing?
yeah,
And so I think that's the same issue for this game. We want it to be less than your experiences with Shock,
yeah,
for sure. And then I am saying let's drag it down even more so it's more like my experiences with Shock.
yeah,
So I'm looking at it and saying, okay, let's just keep that in mind that since we have a very complete system when it comes when it comes to conflicts and it comes to their outcomes, when
yeah,
it comes to developing the fiction from where we start, we
yeah,
have all that. We don't need to do more of that right there in play. Personally, I don't think we need grains to start.
Yeah.
We'll just make them. We'll make grains as we go. Maybe throw out as soon as somebody starts saying, "Hey, here's a grain, here's a grain." Good. That means we're ready to play.
Yeah.
If
And
you're seeing grains, then we're ready to go. Um, in many ways, the more that we learn through playing the characters in action and the less we talk about them first, the better. So the idea that, that's I guess what I'm getting at. There's a lot of room in here for conflicts. This character dislikes that character. This character needs this thing that this other character has.
yeah.
And you talked a lot about how those things change. If they're available to change, then they don't have to be very detailed in the beginning.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I think that's really what I'm doing. I'm trying to sand away all of this discussion beforehand because
Yeah.
what you have to play with is very dynamic and very rich. I made a diagram. Okay. This
Okay.
is a different kind of diagram than the ones you have.
Okay.
So, okay, brace yourself. This is going to look terrible on your screen. But
No.
to give you this
Yeah.
to look at,
Scene. Yeah. Flame shadow. Yeah. I see these elements and they seem familiar to me.
yes, yes, of course they should. I hope so. But so
Yeah.
the summary I'm going to say is that
Yeah.
really you have a great way of a scene generating flame and shadow, and then flame and shadow operate inside the conflict too. And the interesting thing about that is that flame can be used up if you use it a lot in the conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then at the end, we see if someone folds and we see if we are going into endgame.
Yeah.
Now, so folding doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
And if it does, that doesn't mean we have to go into endgame. But those
Yeah.
are organic things that can
Yeah. They
they
are
can get
options.
there. They can
Yeah.
get there.
And they change
Right.
things a little bit.
And
How to.
yes, exactly. And so you also have some the grains and traits really are nothing special. They are just in the conflict process, and that is all. They don't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
And burdens are kind of interesting. They only operate in the conflicts, and the winner and loser can get them. And then
Yeah.
later they give you disadvantages in kinds of conflicts. They are some very consequential. They're in some ways they are the way that your character most basically this is how your character's arm is hurt.
Yeah.
And then they can be more complex and more interesting than that. But that's if you
Yeah.
want injury, you can have it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That is an
Right.
injury mechanic right
Basically,
there.
yeah.
If
In
the
broadly
game.
speaking.
Yeah.
And
True.
that includes revealing some terrible thing about your character, like the cannibalism you talked about,
Yeah.
and things too.
Yeah. That's exactly.
So,
And
mhm.
and the players can like reveal something from each other's character's backgrounds also if you come up with a good burden that
Sure.
you have. Maybe some event triggers something from your past and you now have some issues with it.
And the net effect is basically that your character in a conflict where it's relevant is going to have less effectiveness. They're
Yeah.
going to have to draw on both flame and shadow much harder if they
Yeah.
plan on winning this thing.
Yeah.
So
True.
this is great. So with this all in play, I think that as we really need, I don't think you need even half as much preparation for play as you have.
Okay.
I really think that it may be more fun. This way, you get to play more scenes with less climactic power,
Yeah.
slower,
Yeah.
so that what
Yeah.
the climax turns into really develops more out of play as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that's the real dangers that I see, especially if there's too much front loading, but in general. So this is what I would say. These are the big dangers, the things that I would watch for in play when I'm playing with a group of people and I say, I know there are two ways for this not to be fun. Number one, using the power that we have, especially as the burden, giving a burden, and especially in some of the other things, but especially in giving a burden, to suddenly divert play into something that is spectacular and or silly or suddenly changing things so much so that we had this drama about honor, but all of a sudden then vampire ninjas are coming to get us,
Yeah,
you know. And
I yeah, understand it because I have happen that has happened few times.
right. And so
And
that's danger number one. And we have to
yeah,
think about this a little bit. And we can say, well, and this is the problem. The usual solution is, well, we will all just love each other more and we will all listen to each other more. And then we will put in a point system where if I don't like what you said, I spend a point and you have to
yeah,
take it
yeah,
back and all that shit. None of it
yeah,
works. None
yeah,
of it. So we have
yeah,
to think a little bit more about that. So, number
yeah,
two, what I was talking about before, if we put too much in the beginning, then we play and hit endgame really fast and it's all over before it begins.
yeah,
So we just played the end, and
yeah.
so those are the
That
two.
has never happened
Okay, well, I'm glad to
in
hear it.
our.
That's good
Yeah,
because that's what I'm saying. In this
yeah,
kind of game, those are the two big
yeah,
worries.
yeah,
So with those, that's good. So let's think about a little bit about the you have enough engineering, right? Your systemic features, the diagram that I showed is very, very strong.
yeah,
And if you put one more thing in there, it's too much.
yeah,
And if you and so we don't need to say, oh, you need a point here, you need a mechanic there, oh, you need a
yeah,
number for this, or
yeah,
none of that. That's the
yeah,
last thing you need.
yeah,
So instead, what I'm saying, okay, now how are we going to make this really the strongest experience? And then we have a secondary question. How do we make it the strongest text? Which is a very different question.
yeah,
How do we make a strong? I mean, the writing is extremely clear. I mean,
yeah,
all I have to do is read one section and it is done. I get it. There's
yeah,
no question about that. So here's an interesting, I'm going to give you an example from the past. Are you familiar with My Life with Master? I'm pretty sure you are.
yeah,
Right. Early, Paul said, this is a pretty strong framework. It could be adapted into all kinds of different centuries, all
yeah,
kinds of different settings, all kinds of
yeah,
different arrangements of characters. Maybe I should expand this a little bit.
yeah,
And I gave him some advice at that time, which I think was very good advice.
yeah,
It might not be for every game, but it was good advice for him, which was you began this whole project with a beautiful and very powerful sense that you really understood this kind of story for
yeah,
this setting with this imagery.
yeah,
The grotesque minion in the Gothic
yeah,
castle, and it's not 1895, this is 1805. You
yeah,
have this, everything is really set. You really have
yeah,
this great sense of what this is about.
yes, and
Everything
it's
in the
really
game has,
powerful.
yeah,
Yeah,
and every decision you have made about the way the game works has always kept your eye on that particular imagined vision.
yeah,
Because it's working so beautifully, exactly what you said is correct. But now you realize that maybe other people, if you present it as this spray of options, they are not going to feel that same power.
mm, yeah,
And so if they do, then they will realize exactly what you just said and they will hack
mm,
it
yeah.
and they will
Uh,
do fine.
yes, and
And
that
that
is
will,
we talked about it last time. I think the like danger or um, burden of being generic
mhm.
in the sense of setting and genre.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so it's very interesting because shock looks like it's generic, but it's not. It's actually
Yeah.
drawing
It's
on a
not.
very limited subset of science fiction.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
it's my favorite subset of science fiction.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
That's why
right,
I
exactly.
feel
But it
so good.
is, and it is also open to many different dials that we think of as genre, like how
Yeah.
much action or how much explosion or are the people like cats.
Uh,
But none of that
yeah.
shit is really genre,
Yeah,
right? And
that's true.
so it's really not.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the precise literary genre, shock is very focused.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so I think that that kind of focus is something for you to consider, especially in terms of presentation,
Yeah.
that maybe it might work to be branded, if you will, with a kind of, I mean, you see, this is the thing. Is it really a virtue? Is it really a selling point for a game to say it can be anything? It can be any kind of story.
Yeah.
Is it
I
really
don't
a
think
selling
it's
point? Is it really, I mean, is it, and I understand that Shock and Sorcerer is another very good example. My own game, Sorcerer.
yeah, yeah,
It is a virtue of the game that it is very adaptable,
yeah,
but all of those adaptations are still focused on an extremely specific literary convention.
yeah,
In Shock, that the world has changed with an undeniable reality, but it challenges the kind of thing your characters and you think are reality.
yeah.
And so, a very specific convention. With
That's
Sorcerer,
true.
a very specific convention. Demons don't exist, and you have one.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
nature of the power itself is mind blowing, and to the point of morality no longer occurs. So,
yeah,
what are you going to do?
yeah,
And so it doesn't matter if it is set in feudal Japan. It doesn't matter if it is set on Mars.
yeah.
Well, I will take
That's
it back. Just like in Shock, it matters what the details are this time,
yeah,
but the fundamental is still there.
yeah. It's not in the center of the experience,
Right,
like what the game is really about.
right.
It's like more like color and
It's more than that.
what's the
It's
scenery
Yeah,
like and
yeah,
how the characters, what are the characters like outside and stuff
right.
like that.
I think
Yeah,
that there is a going too far with that and calling it just a skin. Because
yeah,
I think that the details do matter a lot so that this game will not be like your game. My game
yeah,
of Shock will not be like your game.
yeah,
The setting and the details do matter very greatly, but they
yeah,
matter because of their relevance to the question that is the same between our two games.
yeah, yeah.
And
And
so,
I've played uh, to the same scenario in Entropy with different groups of players,
mhm,
and I intentionally try to avoid like contributing too
right,
much
right,
myself,
mhm,
just to see what happens and how and the interactions, and they were quite different with different groups, but in the core I would say it's still the conflict between characters, between powerful or
mhm.
central characters that drives the thing.
Sure. And so this is a game of human passion. Let's look at its
Yeah,
strengths.
yeah,
All right, because we are talking about how to make the game distinctive in the eyes of somebody who is encountering it for the first time.
yeah,
And what makes it distinctive is not that this is a group game with no GM.
yeah. That we have so many of them
We have
already.
so many of them, and ultimately they don't mean very much.
uh,
It doesn't mean very much to say that. And also, it doesn't say very much. In fact, maybe it says almost something negative to say it is so flexible. You can set it anywhere. You can,
yeah,
that
yeah,
even if that is going to be maintained, it should be more like Shock and Sorcerer and less like, oh, Universalis,
yeah,
right? So, So with that in mind, that because the core is this conflict of passions that ultimately is unavoidable. You do have almost a last man standing mechanic. It's not
Yeah.
obligatory, but
Yeah.
it's there if you need it, right?
Yeah.
And so if you really are in many ways saying the crisis among characters is refined and focused, and that character is out, and now it's these characters, and the
Yeah.
conflict is refined and focused, and you know what, it all has to come to a conclusion. It has to.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no other way.
Yeah.
So to bring that out as a virtue, to bring that out as something that really speaks to the new user. You see how I'm getting away from a lot of your introductory material, which in many
Yeah.
ways is kind of vaguely letting that take care of itself someday. And right now we are
Yeah.
talking about how much we agree about stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm saying no. Let's focus instead on the fact that things are going to happen. You
Yeah.
make a character you make a character, you're supposed to love your character, to advocate for a character, but you know what? Your character is a burning torch. And when
Yeah.
we are done,
Yeah.
it's going to be ashes.
If he survives somehow, he will look like a lot different when he
Absolutely.
was when he came to the meat
And I
grind.
think that's exactly what we need to bring out as the virtue of the game. The person says, "Why should I play this? I can play this other GM-less story game." And you say,
Yeah.
"Aha, this is the game where what you just said happens."
Yeah.
This is the game of consequences and development, and it's called Tales of Entropy for a reason.
Yeah.
We start with rocks and torches and solid objects and lots of energy, and we end with the energy dispersed,
Yeah.
right? Entropy has occurred. The question
Yeah.
is, what did it look like on the way, and what is left?
Yeah.
And so you could end with a beautiful jewel of hope and inspiration for humanity,
Yeah.
right? Everything else, the coal has been compressed into a diamond now.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great,
That's possible. Yeah.
or not.
Or not. Yeah.
Right? Or not.
I've seen both.
Okay.
And
Well, you
since we
know what? You just that's the introduction to your game right there. You
yeah.
just said, and I've seen both.
Yeah.
That's the end of the introduction. I'm ready. I'm
Yeah.
ready. What do I do?
Yeah.
The group of me and three other people are ready. We are ready if you tell us that.
Yeah.
And I think that now I'm not saying you should come up with a single setting, but you
Yeah.
should come up with something that summarizes the nature of that kind of story that I can find inspirational.
Yeah.
Um, Joshua had an advantage with Shock because he could invoke that kind of science fiction in many different ways without giving a single setting.
Yeah.
Paul, of course, took the perhaps easiest route, which was the most honest for him at the time, which was to simply stick with the setting and the vision that
Yeah.
really spoke to him from the beginning anyway,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
stay with it, and that was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
When he did that, in Italy in 2010, I think, when I visited for a convention there, they had played a game, and I think it was, I don't know if they called it My Life with Marguerite or something like that.
Okay.
And it was set in high school, and the master was the evil girlfriend.
Okay. Yeah.
And the minions were all of these pathetic men
Yeah.
and it was almost too honest.
Yeah.
And they said they were going to play it just for a scenario, just for fun, play a scene or two.
Yeah.
No, after they did that in the beginning of the convention, they played that game through the whole convention, session after session after session,
Yeah.
until
It
they
was.
played it by the rules. They didn't make it too fast and try to wrap
Yeah.
it up. They said,
Yeah.
"We are really playing. We have 3 or 4 days here. We are going to do it until this is done right."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was and all it does is make. I think that Paul even said that they could sell it after
Yeah.
that. But I think the most important point was that everything about that made My Life with Master more famous,
Yeah.
right? It was a
Yeah.
benefit to the game as written that
Yeah.
they could do this.
Yeah.
Paul didn't have to include it in the game or
Yeah.
make
They
it an
kind of
option.
felt the power of the
Right.
core of the game
Exactly.
in and you saw it in new light or something.
Absolutely. And so I think therefore so for you, I'm not saying the way to go. In some ways, shock may be the better model.
Yeah.
And yeah, in some ways, shock may be the better model. It's funny because this is my life right now. When I'm playing or consulting and my kids
Yeah.
come in. I'm at the
Yeah.
office now, by the way.
Yeah.
Right now,
So
I am at the företagarcentrum. It's Strickbreden in what's called
yeah.
the office, and so
Okay.
I'm paying
Easier.
every
Yeah.
month to be able to use this facility, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
So anyway, the result then is for me to say, let's front load much less, but include in the beginning these particular strengths
Yeah.
of your characters, of the interaction and the nature of play. You don't know where it's going to go, but it will not stop.
Yeah.
This will not flounder. Nobody's going to sit around saying, "Gee, what should happen next?" That you don't have to worry about that. You
Yeah.
don't have to worry about sitting around trying to pitch, would this be better for the story? Would that be
Yeah.
better for the story?
Yeah.
Forget all of that. We don't have to do
Yeah.
it. And so I think that being able to say that in the beginning to light the fire, to get it going under everybody, you really don't need very much content as long as it is focused on that concept that this is going to be either a handful of ashes and blood stains and ashes, right?
Yeah.
Or a diamond.
Yeah.
You can start, and that's what, and either way is fine.
Yeah.
But we're going
Yeah.
to find out.
Yeah.
And I really think that focusing the presentation in that fashion will permit people to. I think that it will avoid our dangers, the suddenly silly thing, right?
Yeah.
That will help keep that from happening. And if you don't have the problem already, you have already said you don't really have the problem, that it's over too fast, that
Yeah.
we just hit the climax and done, then
Yeah.
okay, that
Yeah.
was the other danger. But if we are not seeing it, then I'm not going to try to
Yeah.
fix it. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That it has few reasons why I think it's not
Hmm.
relevant here. One reason is so that you kind of can't cripple your opposition fast
Right.
in the game. It is
Right.
not possible. I try to like most of the times when I play this game, and especially when I play with players I haven't played before, I start the first scene as the operator narrates the first scene, and
Hmm.
usually he can insert his own character in it. And after that, I just play as hard as I can.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
like that's I hit as hard as I can,
Hmm.
and it has never led to a situation that ended the game because
That's
I I,
fantastic. You
I
know,
just can't.
you
It's
should
not
have that in
possible.
the rules. You should say
Okay.
best practices: hit as hard as you can. The game is
Yeah.
durable. You will
Yeah.
not break the fiction. You
Yeah.
don't have to take it easy.
Yeah.
The process is durable. It
Yeah.
is resilient and durable, and you will see things happen, but you won't break it by going as hard as you can. If the
Yeah.
burden applies, make it apply. Don't take
Yeah.
it easy on anybody.
Yeah.
It won't do anybody any favors,
No,
right?
and it actually helps very much to you said it well that light the thing in fire,
Hmm.
and that is how it works. If you hit it very hard, it just lights the other
Right,
characters also
right.
in fire. And if you try to, uh, I think it was in the example that in the sample scenario, it was as the evil shaman came to the island, came to the festivities and just tries to win over the king and
Hmm.
like that. And if he succeeds, yeah, now the king is in his favor. But the other characters are still alive. They
Right,
are still
right.
active. They can still do.
Hmm.
They are not down.
That's right, right. He
Yeah,
didn't win. He only made the story go this way, and now it's
yeah,
going to be a lot of fun.
yeah,
In fact,
yeah,
how it's more fun that way. The shaman came and took over the king. Okay, now
yeah,
we are in the shit. We've got to do
yeah,
something here. Yeah.
yeah,
So so I think that has this helped a little bit thinking about presentation and perhaps I'm trying to bring out the strengths so that
yeah,
people say this is really something I want to do.
yeah.
Um,
And I think that is really difficult to like summarize your own work or something, like
it's
present
what, yeah,
something in a short amount of text
right.
just to bring the essence of something.
Absolutely. And that's why I was saying pay attention to what we actually said because you can do it in
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
And I've even had people say to me, well, I can't come up with a good introduction. All I want to say is this. And they say
yeah.
something
Yeah,
beautiful and poetic, right?
yeah,
Really good. And I say,
yeah,
well, you just did.
yeah.
Use that.
That's it.
you
Yeah,
know, quit trying to write it. You already know
yeah,
it, you know?
yeah,
So
yeah,
and I think that's a really good start. The other thing I wanted to say about there was something else I wanted to articulate a little bit. There is a tendency, first of all, whatever you are good at, you can't write, you can't explain.
yeah,
I remember I've gone through this many times with people, and I say, well, how do you get this? You keep talking about this. How does that happen? They say, but everybody does that. Anybody can do that.
yeah,
And I'm saying, actually, that's exactly what they don't know how to do. You know
yeah,
how to do it. You do it every time in play.
yeah,
What is it? And so, how did you do that? You have to look at yourself in play and say what that is. Number
yeah,
one. Number two, uh, hiding yourself. I mean, I don't know if this is a Nordic thing. It might be.
yeah. It's
The
Finnish thing.
tendency to write the game text in a very neutral, even, quiet way.
Yeah,
The game text is just smooth and quiet and like a little bit gentle. We are not going to get excited here. Being excited
yeah,
is for Italians. We are Nordic. You
yeah,
know, being
yeah,
excited is for Russians.
yeah,
They get excited about everything. We are going to have fika, and we are going to make this nice and civilized here.
yeah. And
And in
especially
some,
we're not going to promote ourselves,
that I
like
think is a big part of it, yes.
yeah,
And so I think that without, of course, putting your big face on the cover and say, this is Petteri's game. Look at me, right?
yeah,
So I'm not saying that. You don't have to
yeah,
be that American, right?
yeah,
We'll leave that. I live here now. We'll leave that to the
yeah.
Americans.
I don't
Right.
think that's possible to go there. So
Right, of course. So we're not doing that. On the other hand, you can be proud of your game and you can let the text show the pride.
yeah,
And so in the pride in what? Pride in this dynamic quality that and keeping in mind, and I know this from Spiona and Shahida especially, and right now in my sorcerer game, that people who sit down and say, well, I'm not really a role player. I'm here because my boyfriend is the role player.
yeah,
I'll be sure I'll play.
yeah.
They're the best, aren't they?
Many
Always.
times in
Yeah, they
this
are
this kind
often,
of games. Yeah,
yeah, they are really, really, really good at it.
yeah,
And so realizing that this capacity to do this is more common than we think.
yeah.
and to appeal to that quality in people, almost to the point where you take the gamer and you have to kind of say, look, all your habits are causing trouble here.
Yeah,
You know,
I
your
would
habits are terrible.
yeah, I
Yeah,
would say that playing lots of role-playing games or uh, at least some types of
hmm
games like uh, uh, hinders you from playing these kind of games like
I completely
entropy.
agree.
Yeah,
And so I think that to sort of think of who is my target, write to that person, you know,
yeah,
to speak as if you're speaking to the person you know can really feel this.
yeah.
And I will also say your text is very clear. I mean, don't
Okay.
get me wrong. There's That is not the problem. The
No.
explanation of what to do is not a problem at all.
Okay.
So it's a matter of inspiration rather
Yeah.
than clarity. You have
Yeah.
clarity.
Yeah.
So the inspiration to me feels very flat and is trying to appeal to people about the wrong things. It's true that your game has no fixed game master.
Yeah.
So what? That's a feature. It doesn't elevate it above anything.
Yeah.
But the features are the things that we are getting excited about just talking about together right now.
Yeah.
You know, those are the
Yeah.
features. Let's
Yeah.
let's make this powerful, right?
Yeah.
So whether you decide that maybe trying a document with one setting or a document which is a little more like Shock, which completely focuses on a kind of story with adaptability for setting,
Yeah.
right? Either of those is a lot better than just saying, well, any story,
Yeah.
anything, right? So, so that's kind of where I'm going now. In many ways, I mean, I know that Joshua wanted a generic cover for Shock, just a graphic cover.
Yeah.
I think that's a terrible idea.
Okay.
You know, even though Sorcerer is adaptable, I still gave it a very high punch, high content cover.
Yeah. Specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the same thing goes for a number of other games. Even if Paul had made My Life with Master more broad in its application, he
Yeah.
would still do well to have that very specific image on the cover.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking. What is that for you?
Yeah.
And make it go. Say that's what I want on that. I mean, that's my image. That's what I want people to see. That's my. It may not be the single setting for the game, but it is the spirit of the game
Mm.
right here. And people want that. They will buy and play the dumbest fantasy, most generic fantasy game you can think of. Now, I wouldn't want to name any overly overly advertised mediocre games out loud right now, except that it would be Simbaroom.
Okay.
You know, right now it's got its English translation, it's got its Italian translation, Simbaroom, Simbaroom everywhere. It was all over Gen Con last year in the United States, blah, blah. It's a boring little fantasy game that anybody could have written.
Okay.
It's not that special.
Yeah.
But it has the cover on it of gloomy Nordic forest in a highly fated story.
Okay.
Everybody sees that cover and they say, "Oh, I want some of that."
Yeah.
The game may not deliver this. Maybe I'm being ungenerous and maybe it can. Okay. But the thing I'm saying is that it is not that is more attractive as product. An inspiration, even if the game is not so good,
Yeah.
that's more attractive than a fantastic game whose inspiration is just a blank and says, "Oh, you'll get there. It can do anything."
Yeah. Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
that's because that
Yeah.
inspiration is the only reason why we start to play.
Yeah.
So we can't know that the game is really, really good and can do all these things if we don't get into it.
Yeah.
And so to get
And
into it, something.
need to take the first step.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you.
I hope you feel better. Right.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye bye.